So you'll see that my talk will fit in nicely with what we heard earlier. So Bobo was talking this morning about how do we make sure that we're not just in this push mode all the time and bringing data, bringing information, and nobody takes the decisions on the basis of this. Joost was saying, well, we need to make sure that we also bring future-oriented information into the equation. And that's something which is also going to be picked up. But I want to focus here on future competitors and how to get ready for a future competitive situation. Now, what I'm going to talk about is fueled sort of with my split personality here. So I do have some industry past, so you can also talk to a very pragmatic René Rohrbeck. I'm also a professor of strategy with a research team where we regularly benchmark organizations on how they deal with the future, but also how they deal then with creating joint insights and joint visions on how to act in a future competitive situation. And it's much more fun, as you can imagine, to put my academic hat on, because then I can also bring you to dream a little bit about how do we develop our competitive intelligence function inside our organizations. Now, when I talk about foresight and about what intelligence can do to improve our competitive situation in the future, then I like this sentence here. It's only a simple sentence, but it carries a lot of demands for what we need to do. So what I would propose is that if we think about intelligence, we need to also think about it as being able to create for our organizations an understanding of how we build this superior position, and that then in the market of the future. And we heard a lot today about how things are picking up in pace, technology is moving fast, the markets are moving fast, everything becomes more complex, and all that is true. But the real takeaway of what that means is when you think about how fast it is these days for competitors to copy what you are doing. This is something which fundamentally changes the rules of the game. We teach even in business schools today the ability to download the business model and the value formula from existing companies. This is something which 10 years ago you would not have been able to do because you're not inside the contracts. You can't find on B2B platforms what people might be actually paying for some parts they put into a final product. Today is possible, and that means if you have a good business model, make sure that you also are the best at operating it and that you're able to upgrade that if you get competition, and you will get competition. So if we think about how to make that happen, that we have this vision about the position we want to have, then I think there's three main things which we need to get right. The first is that we need to see the change. That is something which you say, yeah, that's my business. We need to understand the consequences. And here I put a little bit the head on of the discussions I have with top management teams, where they often would say, I've got an intelligence function, but they don't tell me what the implications are. That's something I need to worry about, but then I'm reading all kinds of reports and I can't make that final step. And then it's only going to get worse because ultimately the value which you create in intelligence, that is only going to pay off if the decisions are really being taken, right? And that is the challenge which you have even if you report to one particular function in the executive team, they will also need to convince the others. And that's about this legitimizing the action, making sure that you're ready to take a decision which might be a big investment, which might be merging, which might be closing down part of your business. I'm going to give you now some practical tools which we employ and which I have organized here around the framework which we have built over the years, which we call perceiving, prospecting, probing, or you find it also as the maturity model of corporate foresight. In principle, it takes you through seeing something, understanding the consequences, and probing into it. We heard already from Joost about A and B testing. This is something which even large organizations do these days in venturing, making sure that they have these small experiments. Now, these 6 main tools, I want to take you quickly through for us to understand jointly what is something where then the intelligence function can not only feed into, but really leverage on as a lever to really push these decision making. Now, the first one is what I call here a strategic radar. And now, while this might simply look as something nice to look at and something nice to have, there's a lot of logics built into these type of strategic radars. The first thing which is very difficult to legitimize then a decision for investment is if you don't speak the same language. So somebody is saying, well, we've got a huge trend in distributed energy production, and the other one says, well, we've got a problem with all these consumers who want to feed some electricity in our grid. Once you have a strategic radar, you can bring that discussion together because you put into such a radar a concept of a trend or of a new product or new service from either you or your competitors. These type of strategic radars are well spread. The ones which I name here are ones I also know that have a good follow-up process to it, because some also simply have it to publish it. Now, all of these dots here, they are typically represented with a quite dense one-pager. And if you go on the DHL website, they have that half open. I think you just need to tell them who you are and you can download their report. It's a one-pager which is tied then to your logic as an organization. So you not only see a trend, which might be even something you get from a consultant or you find yourself, but it's translated to your organization. And that makes it stick out for top management, because they read plenty of reports and they might get it, and we have to admit that, or two, they might get that from more trusted sources. So at least the CSO I was reporting to for a while, he would always come back from his meetings with his peers from other industries, and he would have the trends. And now he didn't look at my trend report anymore. So you need to inject into the finding of the trends or of the monitoring of your competitors what it means for your organization. That creates the value. Now, the second thing which needs to happen, and you might have a strong role in orchestrating this, is forming corporate opinions. Now, I took simply a little S-curve here for the lack of something nicer to show. We already saw a Gartner hype cycle today. That's another way of representing the same thing. The point being that you want to form a joint opinion, so that not the top management has one opinion how mature something is, you as intelligence function has another opinion, marketing had a third one, product development a fourth one. You need to have a opinion so that you can then also move and take decisions at the point in time where it's necessary. At the same time, this also allows you to then monitor towards a point in time where the decision needs to be taken. Because you can then also have early warning thresholds where you say, if that threshold is breached, then we need to take the decision. Then we need to either invest or say, we were never going to enter that market. Something which in our benchmarking only 5% of companies are doing. Scenarios. Who is using scenarios in this room? That would be some 5-ish from the total population. Why does it matter? I'm working a lot in the automobile industries these days. That's also for a particular reason. We often work in industries which have seen some steady change, and then they see some radical change. And that's where the automobile industry is. And the automobile industry today is, seeing this as, well, that's what's happening. So we bring more and more maybe electronics here into the car, and that's nice because we can sell more. If you ask an engineer in the automobile industry what they see as a vision for the future, then it will be something like that. That looks quite interesting. So some platooning going on. Cars are driving automatically after one another. If the first one breaks, all the others break at the same time. So we can move them closer. It's also very interesting for trucks, because that saves a lot of fuel. It's great. I'm still selling the same car with the nice leather seats and all the extras, plus the additional electronics. Wonderful. Now, problem is if I'm asking my students, seeing something like this. Now, if you're not from the car industry, you might say, oh, well, it's even better, you know, a flying car surely is more expensive than a normal car. And you might be right on that point. Problem being something else. And that is, if you have an autonomous driving car, or indeed then also an autonomous flying car, you're only going to sell 30% of the cars you sold before. That's your first problem, right? Because, you know, the first adult gets transported to work, your car comes back, picks up the other adult, and picks up the kids, or in another direction, or another order. But you don't need 2 cars, and you certainly don't need 3 cars anymore. The other problem is, imagine it is an autonomous car, and you can also Airbnb that out. Let somebody else share it while you don't use it. That would be great for the environment, bad for the car industry, right? For the same reason that you're not selling as much, but plus, if it's a car which you're also frequently selling out, then you won't have the best type of leather seats, and you won't have the best navigation system. You would, you know, settle on a kind of standard which is okay for everyone. We all experience that, I think, with our summer houses and so on, right? So either you hide it in a closet in the summer house, or you simply don't put the good china there, etc. So that's a lot of issues which, for a car industry, it's even difficult sort of to discuss at all this. On a case, I mean, it's kind of easy also if it's only at the evening, because then everyone is bashing this as not feasible, not viable, not happening. But as a car company and as a shareholder, you should really start caring about this and starting preparing to either, you know, play in this or find a good other source of revenue. So scenarios will help you to consolidate opinion, but also then to make financial predictions about what that would mean. Now, why this matters so much is also because the most dynamics is not happening between you and your current peers in your industry. Even though, my rough guess is most of the competitive intelligence, maybe some 90%, will be focused on the companies which are like you, which are the same position in the value chain, which might even have similar sizes, same customers they approach. And that's not where the threat is coming from, and that's also not where the superior growth is going to come from. It's going to come from an industry value chain dynamics. And the car industry is also a very interesting case in point here. When you think about these companies here, the OEMs, which are they're called in the jargon, they have achieved something which is very rare in industries, and this is they have kept about from sort of 75 to about 85% of the market capitalization in the industry distributed among themselves. In the 90s and in the early 2000s, there was a lot of talk about we're going to see a lot of the profitability, and with that a lot of the market capitalization migrating to the suppliers. And it was at the brink of happening, but they pushed that threat back because they were simply starting new suppliers. If one supplier became too dominant, they even helped at starting up a second company, just to make sure that there's always 2 suppliers which can fight among themselves and keep sort of the profits low on that end. That's potentially quite nasty. So if you follow the press these days, Lyft has had their IPO. Uber is preparing their IPO. They're thinking that when the IPO happens, a market valuation of Uber at around $100 billion is sort of roughly what we're talking about. Quick reality check, what's the market valuation of a Volkswagen? Well, it's 80 billion. It's a way more complex company, way more sunk assets, and still the market valuation, and with that the expectations of the profitability are sort of at par. That's pretty nasty. One needs to do something about that. Car OEMs do invest into ride-hailing firms, for instance, for that purpose. But that is something which now puts an emphasis on making sure that we are seeing the bigger picture in our industry. Just a quick check on this one. Who is monitoring or doing intelligence on other parts of the value chain, very specifically, to see whether there's threats coming either from your buyers or from your suppliers, etc.? Who is doing that regularly? Okay. Start wondering if it's always the same 6 or 7 people. But I hope I was convincing that is important, right? So that is where big threats will come from, and that's also where you get the ear from the top management. If you say, we've been investigating into value chain dynamics. What we often then do is we do such a deep actor analysis, as I call it here. And that can come in many different forms and flavors, but the point is we want to fundamentally understand what are their objectives, what are they trying to achieve. So for instance, with Uber, why are they such a big market valuation? What are they actually trying to achieve? Do they want to sell an app? Well, probably not the ends to it, right? So what does an Uber want to achieve? Well, they want to actually own 2 main things from you. One is the entire mobility revenue, maybe not all the revenue, but at least all the profitability, because they're going to be the exclusive access to your mobility. And the second thing is they would like to own your attention also while you're at it. Get ready for getting some advertisement and so on their app while you're driving, in between maybe free movies or things like that. There's a lot of strange things going on because there's some objectives which you would not expect. If you ask a BMW what's their objective in the market, joy of driving or selling more leather seats, yes, but there's somebody with deeper pockets potentially entering this space. And that's dangerous. Ultimately, what we then aim to do is we put top management through a business war game for 2 reasons. First is top management likes playing. They want to see what's going on. I need to feel it. A lot of top management is not yet fully data driven as we would like them to be, maybe. So a lot of it's gut feeling. And they get really, really excited when they are able, from the position of their competitors, shoot down their own organization. That's something they really, really love. And they get much more excited about that than defending their own company for some reasons. But I'm not a psychologist. That's only my wife, so I'm not going to judge that. But that allows you to have an easy access to also a lot of data. So what is happening here is also that such a market and control team, that's staffed with intelligence people. So they are now able to feed all the reports which otherwise don't get read or not read in detail into the channel of where top management is actually interested, has the time, and looks deeply into those numbers. So that's why this becomes a very interesting catalyst for discussing this with your top management. So if we do all this, if we do it as a project, we have already achieved quite a lot because we have been able now to bring more data to the top management. We would have gotten feedback on what matters on the broader context of the competitive situation. But the real key to make this successful is that you institutionalize that, or as I call it here, that you build such permanent routines around it. That it's not a one-off thing. That this radar, for instance, is asking all the time for feedback. So a new topic comes into the radar, and that means that then you also require from the top management or their direct report feedback on this. So that can be something which can be pushed into a mobile app or whatever it is, what top management is finally paying attention to, but that you enforce this feedback loop early on. And ultimately, this day-to-day decision-making is still a big riddle for me also. I remember when I started in a position reporting to the CSO from Deutsche Telekom, he told me, you know what, some 7 years ago when I started here, I would receive this long letter of 30 pages from the CEO once a year, asking all kinds of questions about my industry and about our competitive position and so on. Then we had 3 months to answer to this, and I would go back, and then I would hear from him next time around the year after. And his point was, today is Monday, and it's 10 o'clock, and I exchanged already 2 emails and 3 SMS with my CEO. And that's probably not the way forward, because that is then often something which doesn't get followed up. It's something which is just instantly interesting, but then you don't really change it and you don't implement new strategies. So ultimately, when we talk about day-to-day decision making, we're talking about following a strategy over a longer period of time, but getting from competitive intelligence my dashboard to navigate there. I think it was Ingmar who said this morning, driving blindfolded. Many CEOs, many management teams would still think that this is kind of the case, despite you're providing a lot of data to show them wrong. But to have this final translational layer, this dashboard of saying, here we're monitoring how much autonomous driving is actually happening in the world, or how many cars are being sold electrified in different countries and for which reasons, and what kind of legislation comes in. This is something which they will require on a daily basis, and that also keeps them interested in the work as an intelligence personnel. It's 3 real big takeaways which I would like to focus here on my last slide. The first one is that we will be focusing on this forward-looking type of intelligence. And this is not easy because you don't have data about next year. Right? So you need to create a proxy to this type of data. And that can go through analogies, and that can also happen through such thought experiments. What would we do if a competitor who is unlike us enters our market, runs a platform business, as Joost was explaining, etc.? What would we do? Let's play that in a war game. That creates a good proxy for actual data. Impactful intelligence, understood as we really take decisions on the basis of this intelligence, needs to be built on what I call this shared future outlook. And the point being that you need to have a routine of synchronizing this. I remember from my own industry past that I was always coming with data and had questions about the relevance of this, but my top management will always say, yeah, okay, thank you, leave the report here, and so I'll read it later, or you tell me what the most important thing is in the report. That is also changing, luckily, on the board level, that they say, no, I want to understand the evidence behind that suggestion, and I want also then potentially some deeper digging, and there's more of a dialogue happening. And that can be catalyzed or made very efficient by using such scenarios, radars, and these type of trend audits, which I talked about, which means you don't need to talk about this every day, but you synchronize that. And the third one is this moving towards real-time decision-making. So even though I would say it's a really bad idea that the CEO calls the CSO or writes emails or whatever it is, 5 times before 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, that's a real bad idea, because that probably means that it's not very meaningful questions, it's not very meaningful answers. But we see that the need is there to have this more real-time-ish feedback loop. And with that, I say thanks so much.